Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Test 1 2 3 1 2. All right, good morning. Good morning, good morning, morning. It is that time. Well, moving a little slower these days. I do want to thank Tim for stepping in last week. Last Saturday night, I was on my way to cover a soccer match in Lyon County, got about 8 miles down the road, said something doesn't feel right. Turned around, went home, and was sick the rest of the night. So Sunday morning, last Sunday, I got out of bed to take a shower. That was the event of my day. But thankfully, stomach bugs usually don't hang around too long. So, okay, prayer list as I run to get it here from Pete. Linda Winstead, shoulder replacement surgery is still on the schedule for August 23rd. Michael Scott, Debbie Scott's husband, is now under hospice care. Fred McLaren going to have hip replacement surgery coming up on August 20th, which will be Tuesday. Barbara? That's Marsha Parker? Ooh, okay. All right. So that makes for an eventful week. Marsha Parker broke her femur that goes into the hip, and ended up, due to that, having a total hip replacement. So, Aaron, how is Billy? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So David's mom broke her arm. Anybody else? Any updates? Of course, all kids are back to school a lot of places, and here is day 26. So wait for tomorrow. So everybody counting down the days at this point. And then I think once Christian County gets back in, that will be everybody back in. All right, if we don't have anything else, Pete, if you would lead us with a prayer. Thanks, sir. All right, we are in chapter 9 of Mark. If you want to get your paper Bibles out or your digital Bibles and get your app open, we are in chapter 9. And we're going to look, first of all, today at the Transfiguration as we look at Mark 9, verses 2 through 13. So we're going to start in that section of Mark today, and we'll start specifically with Mark 9, verses 2 and 3. And those two verses read, "After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves to be alone. He was transfigured in front of them, and his clothes became dazzling, extremely white, as no launderer on earth could whiten them. So something special happens here on the mountain. One note there, it says his clothes became as white as no launderer could make them. How many of you all remember some of the laundry commercials back maybe the 60s and 70s and talked about how white your whites would be and how bright your colors would be? All those commercials for either bleach or laundry detergent, talking about how white your clothes could be. And here it specifically mentions that no launderer could get clothes as white as what they saw Jesus' garments become here. So we're up on the mountain. We're up on the mountain. Scholars suggest that the high mountain could be Mount Hermon, which is located northeast of Caesarea Philippi. Mount Hermon is first mentioned back in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 8. Others suggest they are on Mount Meron, northwest of the Sea of Galilee. Mount Meron is a 7-hour hike to Capernaum. Could be either, but it's really the specific mountain is not, the big deal here. Now, this is a direct parallel to the events that happened at Mount Sinai with Moses in Exodus 24. Jesus took 3 with him here. Anybody remember how many people went with Moses? Not into that part, but how many people were in close with him? Let's say, I'm trying to remember, there were Nahab, Abihu, and there was one other who were connected. Sort of a parallel type situation. And I can't remember the other name. Now, the Greek word for transfiguration, it's not a word we use much today, is it? We use more today, we use this word right here. Transformed. So as they're walking along, Jesus is transformed. Little human nature part of this here. What would you do, what would you say if you were walking along with somebody and all of a sudden they turn bright white? And they start, essentially what we would say today is they're glowing. What would you say? What would you think? A ghost? Yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, even with everything the disciples had seen, even with everything they had seen Jesus do, the miracles, the wonders, and all of that, they're walking along and all of a sudden, poof, he's bright white. And not only that, but what else? He's not by himself. Can you imagine some of the whispers that started first is, where'd those 2 guys come from? And what's happened to Jesus? He's glowing. But transfiguration, we use the word transformed. Here's one artist's rendering of what happened. Did it look like that? Don't know. But you could see that the way it's described, it could very well have looked something like that. In some aspect, I don't know about you, but I might have turned and ran down the mountain. I think I might have turned and gone the other way, not understanding just what's going on here. But there's something going on. Now, at this moment, the divine glory of Jesus is unveiled for Peter, James, and John to see. And then God speaks. But they see at this moment a divine nature, the divine glory of Jesus in this moment. What would you have thought at this moment? Anybody?
I think human nature most of it is paralyzed with fear.
Yeah. You know, we have seen, Pete, you mentioned that, we've seen instances when Jesus calmed the sea, they were appreciative, but they were also what? They were scared. Jesus spoke the sea to calm down, and they wig out. And you can imagine this same situation happening here. They're sitting there going, I wonder in their mind if they're thinking at some point, do we go the other way? Do we stay here? What's going to happen? What are we doing? Now let's go on to verses 4 through 7 as we're seeing the transfiguration here. And it says, Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let's set up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Because he did not know what to say since they were terrified. A cloud appeared, overshadowing them, and a voice came from the cloud, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. So, as I look at this, what's one question? It's always come to me, has it ever come to you, the one question that you look at as you're reading verse 4, what's one question that could come to mind? Yeah. How did they know who it was? You know, we only know cameras in this country, or photo cameras have been around for a couple hundred years. We know back about the time of the Civil War, photos became a thing. So we know what Abraham Lincoln looked like because there are actual pictures. They didn't know who Moses and Elijah were, but what they looked like. So how did they know? Did they hear Jesus say, hey Moses, how are you? Elijah, good to see you again. Or were they divinely aware? Through divine means, they were aware of who was there. We're not told. We're told who's there, but we're not told how they know. So it could be that they heard Jesus mention a name, or it very well could be that there was some supernatural awareness impressed upon them of who they were seeing. So we got Elijah and Moses. Elijah and Moses. Why is it Elijah and Moses are the ones that appear? Could have been any number of heavenly persons, couldn't it? You know, why not King David? Why not Abraham? Why Elijah and Moses? In the Old Testament law, first of all, 2 witnesses were required to prove someone's guilt. Here God sends 2 witnesses to validate Jesus' identity. That's one commentator came across with this, said, 2 witnesses. So Elijah and Moses are also there to help validate what's taking place. Moses and Elijah both witnessed the glory of God on a mountain. Both were faithful servants who suffered because of their obedience, were rejected by the people, and were vindicated by God. That all sounds familiar about what's going on again at this point, doesn't it? Jesus will suffer because of his obedience. He was rejected by the people, and he was vindicated by his Father. Both worked miracles through their hands. Moses and Elijah were referred to in an eschatological context in salvation history when Christ came. Malachi 4 through 6 reads, remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and laws I gave him at Horeb for all Israel. See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. As we go through the New Testament, oftentimes, who is Elijah a pre-type of that we see? And as is here, as we're looking at, is he not used as a pre-type for John the Baptist? That Elijah comes ahead, John the Baptist comes ahead. The cloud is a picture of the presence of God. A voice also spoke from the cloud in Exodus 24:16, and the result of the experience was the fear of the people, as you see in Exodus 35:30 and 20:18. God's presence, his voice from a cloud. Now, between the transfiguration and the cloud, it tells us that they were terrified here. Peter is overwhelmed in the moment. He's overwhelmed, he's scared. So what does he do? Have you ever been in a moment you were either too scared, you were too awestruck, or you didn't know what to do? So maybe you said something, may not have been the most accurate statement or the most proper statement for the moment, but you just said something because you had to say something. How many of you ever been to the Grand Canyon? How many of you, you pull in the parking lot at the park, if you've been to the South Rim, you pull in the parking lot and you start walking up to the Welcome Center. The kicker about when you get there to the Grand Canyon is you can't see it when you first pull in the parking lot of the park. It looks like you're down here at Lake Barkley or anywhere else just sort of walking up to a lodge or something. You're walking up, and when you get out there to the Welcome Center and you step around the side, there it is. Ever been awestruck when you got there and go, boy, that's big? It's like something like that. You're awestruck, you're inspired, it takes it away. And when you get to the Grand Canyon, it's there, it's as far as you can see. And sometimes you just walk in and go, boy, that's big, because you don't know what to say. Well, Peter is in sort of a similar situation in this moment here. He is there, Jesus is glowing, he's transfigured into his divine glory. There's Elijah, there's Moses, and Peter's like, wow. Let's build you guys a house or a tent. But give Peter a little pass here. One commentator said they have no reason to think Moses and Elijah are leaving anytime soon, so Peter offers to make tents similar to the booths used in the Feast of Tabernacles. Such visitors deserve shade from the sun while they confer. They see Moses and Elijah, they think they're there to stay for a while. And Peter is being practical here. He doesn't really catch what's going on, doesn't understand entirely the moment. And we've seen that how many times with the disciples so far. They don't really understand what's going on in the moment. Peter's looking at this and he's being, hey, cut him a break. He's being practical. He thinks, well, Moses needs somewhere to stay, Elijah needs somewhere to stay, and Jesus needs somewhere to stay. Let's build them 3 tents. He's thinking on this plane, though, and not that plane. He's missing out what's going on in the moment. Hey, let's build you some tents. It's not clear how Peter, James, and John know that they are Moses and Elijah, but in the Bible, terror is a standard reaction to seeing those who have come from heaven. So if they knew somehow this is Moses and Elijah, they know they've been dead for a while, and they're back. Yeah, somebody said, ghosts. Terror. But Peter in the moment thinks, hey, they're back, they're going to stay for a while, let's build some tents. Be practical. So as we go on into the situation, beginning with verse 8, it says, suddenly, now before we get to verse 8, real quick, So they've done this. Peter's decided he wants to build tents, and then they hear what? The voice of God. Say, this is my son. Essentially, this is my son. Listen to him. This is my son. Listen to him. And really, this whole moment appears to be for this entire purpose, helping the disciples who have still had a lot of trouble ascertaining just who Jesus is and his purpose, and he's getting ready to start talking to them about some very hard things, isn't he? You know, they've already said, no, you're not going to die. And here's the Father saying, this is my son, listen to what he says. And then they've also seen Jesus in his divine nature, his divine glory here. So at this moment, maybe it's the foundation, especially for these three, to understand, maybe get a really true foundation of really what's going on with Jesus. All right, beginning of verse 8. Suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept this word to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. Then they asked him, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Elijah does come first and restores all things, he replied. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they did whatever they pleased to him, just as it is written about him. So they've seen the transfiguration. They've heard the voice of God from the cloud. What happens now? They're gone. They're gone. Cloud's gone. Elijah, Moses, gone. What do you think in this moment? What are they thinking in this moment? Did we have a vision? Did we eat some bad food? You know, what's going on? Just as quickly as they were there, now they're gone. They're gone. You wonder if they thought, boy, these walks with Jesus are getting interesting. We go out and people appear and disappear. So the message, scene's over. The three no longer see anyone with them but Jesus, who they went up there with in the first place. The scene confirms the preeminence of Jesus, but Jesus instructs Peter, James, and John not to speak about what they'd seen until after he's risen from the dead. So again, you wonder, if the disciples begin to wonder, well, why should we not tell it? This is great. You know, you have been here. We've seen your glory. We've seen all of this. You were with Moses, Elijah. Why don't we tell everybody that we're witnesses to who you are? But Jesus says, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody until I've risen. Why? Anybody got any answers why that might have been? Why would he not want them to tell? Would that not have made the message even more powerful? Why not tell? You know, there were three of them, testimony of three, that would be pretty well, there. Why not? Or are we back to what we've seen a lot of times when he tells them not to tell anything? Can you imagine the turmoil that happens now? And the chaos that happens now, and the hindrance from what he's trying to get done happens if this is told. But he tells them, don't tell until I've risen from the dead.
Not only the chaos, but the misinformation.
Yeah. Not to mention, scribes and Pharisees are already in a turmoil. What happens with this if they get wind that this is going on or that they're saying this? Does it make his teaching on his timetable before his crucifixion, Jesus has a lot he wants to get done before his real purpose for coming happens. Maybe it's just that it would cause too many problems. But that the disciples needed to see and confirm with them who he is. Writer said, you will notice that Jesus agrees that Elijah does come first with the purpose of restoring all things, as it mentions in verse 12. But now Jesus wants his disciples to consider something. How is it written that the Son of Man should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? You know, Elijah comes and restores all things, but now the Son of God's going to be treated with contempt. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, it's confusing to us, and we've had all the research material and all the study material, and they're hearing this in the moment, and these are some fishermen. Jesus is giving some things here that for them are really hard to grasp, really hard to fathom. You know, and let's remember, their perception of the Messiah is a strong, physical, earthly ruler, leader, and yet Jesus is now talking about gonna die, going to be treated with contempt. This is all just not, to them, the pieces aren't fitting in the puzzle here. Commentator went on to say, think about what Jesus is making the disciples think about. If Elijah's role is to restore everything, how can the scripture predict the suffering of the Christ? It doesn't make sense. Verse 13, but I tell you that Elijah has come and they did whatever they pleased to him, just as it is written about him. This is reference to Herod imprisoning and killing John the Baptist, as we saw back in Mark 6:14 through 29. John is this type of Elijah. He comes, he's rejected, he's imprisoned, and he's killed. But he is laying the way for Jesus. Typological. John's coming and John's death is typological fulfillment of what we saw in Malachi and some of the other Old Testament prophets about the preparation of the way for Jesus. Typology in Christian theology and biblical exegesis is a doctrine of theory concerning the relationship of the Old Testament to the New Testament. Events, persons, or statements in the Old Testament are seen as types, prefiguring or superseded by antitypes, events or aspects of Christ or his revelation described in the New Testament. Is not the Old Testament filled with antitypes of things of the New Testament? You can go through the Old Testament and see lots of antitypes or lots of types of things that are fulfilled in the New Testament. And here, Elijah, John the Baptist. We see, the writer said, we see King Ahab and Queen Jezebel causing Elijah's suffering as he proclaimed the message of God to Israel. Now Herod and Herodias have fulfilled that role. The pattern that we see in the life of Elijah as a type that would be repeated again, and it was repeated with John the Baptist. Ahab and Jezebel, Herod, Herodias, Elijah, and John the Baptist. So what is the focal point of the Transfiguration? We've seen this, they go up on the mountain, Jesus transforms, he glows. Elijah and Moses are there. God's presence in the cloud saying, this is my son, listen to him. So what is the focal point? As we look at the whole situation of the Transfiguration, what is the focal point of the Transfiguration? Remember that Jesus had just been talking about taking up our cross. He had just been talking about taking up our cross. Suffering, as we talk about suffering is not incompatible with glory. Suffering is the path to glory from God. Suffering is the path to glory. Jesus is about to suffer immense things. But suffering is our path to glory. Suffering is our path to glory. And I think one of the points we can take is just because we suffer does not mean there will not be glory at some point. But there will be glory. All right, let's go on into the next section, beginning at verse 14. Section we call Help My Unbelief. Help my unbelief. Let's go through verses 14 through 18. Mark 9, verses 14 through 18. When they came to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and scribes disputing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were amazed and ran to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they could not." So we have a young man who has issues, and the disciples could not take care of the issues here. So we've got the problem. We've got the problem. And the scene is something like this. Jesus and the three come down from the mountain, and there's arguments going on. You know, maybe this man and his friends and family are there, and they're saying, we brought him to you. You can't heal him. What's going on? But there was an argument going on when they come down. When Jesus walks up here at this scene, everything stops. The argument stops. Everything comes to a stop here in a minute. Now, why? There are a couple of interesting theories and possibilities that you see commentators put out there. One is that, here's Jesus. You know, Jesus just walks up and here he is. There is another part of this that a lot of theologians believe may have been the reason that everything stops cold when Jesus walks up. When Moses came down from the mountain, what was his physical condition? His face was sort of aglow from being in the presence of God. There are those who believe and those who write that possibly, since Jesus has been transfigured, that the effects of that transfiguration had not completely worn off yet. And that maybe either his visage, maybe his clothes, which would be made out of earthly materials, maybe there was something that was still a little aglow. And so that when Jesus walks up, it's like, ho! There are many who believe that that's probably why everything came to a stop. Because if you look back at Exodus 34, 29 and 30, it says, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. So maybe there's still a little glow going on here as Jesus comes into this setting. It doesn't tell us, it just tells us they stopped. So, Jesus comes down, he comes into this setting, the first thing he says is, "What's up?" He saw the turmoil and the argument and the dispute that was going on. He says, "Hey, what's going on?" It appears that the scribes are arguing with the disciples about their ability after their failure to cast out the unclean spirit. You can see the scribes doing this, couldn't you? Scribes are going there, well, you guys are saying, all this, and you can't even take care of this, what's going on? Some believe the disciples' failure here, here is a result of a lack of faith in the moment. We don't know. We know that they could not. Now, we go on at verse 19, and we get a little bit more into the story about what's going on here. So we've got about 10 minutes. And then Jesus replied to them, "You unbelieving generation, How long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him to me." So they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, and immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. "How long has this been happening to him?" Jesus asked his father. "From childhood," he said, "and many times it has thrown him into the fire or water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you can, everything is possible for the one who believes." Immediately the father of the boy cried out, "I do believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was quickly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." Then it came out, shrieking and throwing him into terrible convulsions. The boy became like a corpse, so that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus, taking him by the hand, raised him, and he stood up. So the real problem. Now, one thing as we look at this story here, as we look at the healings and the miracles that Jesus has worked in, that Mark has noted in his gospel, what's the one difference in the situation with this man compared to some of the others that have come to Jesus? What's the one difference? And it's a focal point of what Jesus talks about later in that section. The woman with the issue of blood, what did she think she had to do? She says, all I had to do is touch the hem. Her faith was such that she knew that Jesus could heal her. All she had to do is touch his clothes. What does this man say here that brings his son to Jesus? Is he confident? He says, "Lord, put your hands on him, he'll be better." Is that what he says? What does he say? There you go, David. If you can. If you can. So he may have heard about Jesus, but he's not real sure of what Jesus can do here. He says, if you can. There has been an overwhelming problem recorded throughout this gospel. The disciples do not fully understand who Jesus is, and the disciples do not have a full faith in who Jesus is in many instances and why he's here. Look at the parents of the child and their "if you can" attitude. And I want to say, bring this forward to today. Do we still sometimes have the "if you can" attitude with Jesus? When we ask, when we pray for things, should we pray for "if you can" or "Lord, Father, if it's in accordance to your will"? You know, I think we should pray, "Father, I know you can do this. If it's in your will, will you help?" Not "if you can." God, can you help me? Yeah, God can help us. We have to have the faith. So we need to go to God, and we need to go to God with the outlook of, "Father, you can, if it's in your will." Not "God, can you?" Because God can. Is there anything God cannot do? Then us saying "God, if you can" is sort of a waste of verbiage, because God can do anything. So, do we sometimes today still approach God with that "if you can" attitude? Is our faith sometimes hindered today by the attitude that this man had about his son? Is our faith hindered sometimes by we go to God and say, "if you can"? Then you wonder if God looks back at us with the same answer Jesus gives here, "if you can." If you can. Do you think God ever looks at us and we ask him, "God, if you can"? He looks at it, "Everything I've done for you, everything I've done in your life, and you ask me if I can." This man's looking for an answer, but he doesn't have faith of where the answer's coming from. One writer said, it is never about what God can do. So much is built on faith. So much is dependent on our trust in God. All things are possible for the one who believes. The problem is not divine willingness, but human unbelief. You know, in the section of Scripture we just read, do you not feel a little frustration from Jesus here? It's like, all the prophecies, all the things I've done here, and you still don't, it's not clicking? The problem's not with God, is it? Who's the problem with? When things don't get done, who's the problem with? Look in the mirror. Don't look at somebody else. Don't look at Sue sitting by you or whatever. Not. Look in the mirror. When things aren't going the way, when we don't think God's answering the way we ought to, problem's not with God. Problem's on the person that's looking back at you in the mirror. The problem is not divine willingness, but it's human unbelief. The writer goes on to say, nothing is too great for God. God can do anything. The parents beg for Jesus' compassion. Jesus does have compassion for us, and he can do anything. We have to have the faith that he will. And then when Jesus says, if I can, verse 24, immediately the boy's father has exclaimed, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. So should we sort of have this attitude each and every day of our life? Should we part of our prayer each day, Father, I believe, but I have my moments. Father, I believe, help me get through the moments of my unbelief. When my faith wavers, Father, help me get through that. Because Father, I know that you are the almighty, all-powerful creator of everything, but I have my moments of struggle. Father, help me get through my unbelief. I think that should be a part of our prayer every morning, every night. Father, help me get through those times where I have trouble believing or trusting. And the Father here says, I do believe, help my unbelief. An attitude we should probably have every day. Because admit it, we all have our moments where our faith and our belief is not as strong as others. And I think part of our challenge as Christians is to admit that happens to us. That we as Christians still have those weak moments. Help me overcome my unbelief. And since we've got just 1 minute, I think it's a good point to stop right there and end with that. Help me overcome my unbelief every day. And we will pick up there next week.